To my channel, Explaining Biology Clearly. Today I'm going to talk to you about viruses. We'll talk a little bit about their structure, what they do, why they're not classed as living, and hopefully get on to talk a little bit about antibiotics and why they don't work against viral infections. So first of all, I suppose the most important thing to say about viruses is that they're non-living. So they're not classed as a living organism. They are inert. They are particles rather than cells. So you wouldn't refer to a virus cell. They are not cells, and the reason why they're non-living is they don't fulfill any of the characteristics of living things, which we'll go through shortly. What do they do? So if you could say they had an aim, I suppose that their aim would be to invade a cell, a living cell, and we call that living cell the host cell. It might be a plant cell, an animal cell, a fungal cell, even a bacterial cell. It just depends on the type of virus as to which living cell it invades. So it invades that cell, it gets into the cell, or at least part of it does, and it causes that cell to make more copies of the virus. So it hijacks, it takes over the chemical reactions within that cell, and the cell makes copies of the virus. The cell becomes a virus-making factory. So it invades the cell, and then the cell makes copies of the virus. The virus will then leave the cell, or the viruses, the many copies of the viruses will then leave the host cell and infect more cells. And the same thing will happen over and over. And hopefully the immune system will eventually get a hold of it and start to destroy the viruses, or at least the cell containing the viruses. So let's take a look at the structure. So on the right-hand side of the page here, I've drawn a typical virus particle. Notice I haven't called it a cell. So at their centre, they contain a piece of DNA or a piece of RNA. It depends on the virus. DNA and RNA are types of nucleic acid. Surrounding that nucleic acid, you find a protein coat, sometimes known as a capsid. Now, for some viruses, that's it. You know, they really are very simple. They don't contain any of the organelles that you find in a eukaryotic cell or even a prokaryotic cell. So check out my videos on either of those two cells to take a look at some of the organelles you find in those cells. They're far more complex than this virus particle. Some viruses will have an additional layer on their outside, and that is a lipid, so a fatty-like substance, a lipid coating called an envelope. The coronavirus has that lipid envelope. That's one of the reasons why when you add alcohol hand gel to your hands, the lipid envelope dissolves in that alcohol, exposing the virus to the environment. So it quite quickly breaks down. Viruses don't survive long outside of a living cell. They're easily broken down, they can dry out, UV light can damage their nucleic acid. So they really do need to get into a living cell. in order to make more copies of the virus. Now, we also I need to just mention, seeing as I mentioned coronavirus, that we may have these proteins sticking out from the surface through the lipid envelope. These here may be called spike proteins, protein spikes. These help the virus to attach to the host cell that it's going to invade. Coronavirus has these spike proteins, and that's why it's given the name corona or crown, because it appears like a crown from the outside. The spike proteins make it appear like a crown. So it has a very, very simple structure. So let's go back. I mentioned that we talk more about why these viruses are non-living. So they don't fulfill any of these characteristics of living organisms. And those are, you may have heard of Mrs. Gren, those are movement. So viruses don't move on their own. They're not mobile. They require a medium. They require something to transport them. So that might be the blood inside the body. It might be mucus. So viruses in the mucus will be transported from one person to another. It could be the air. It needs to be something. They don't reproduce on their own. They have none of the enzymes necessary to do that. They invade the cell, and the cell copies their DNA, and the cell makes proteins from that DNA using the instructions on that virus DNA. They don't grow, they don't have growth, they don't increase in volume, they don't get bigger. I've missed out the S. They're not sensitive to their environment. They don't respond to stimuli as a living cell does. They don't respire. So respire means, or respiration means, to break down glucose and release the energy in that glucose molecule. They don't break down glucose. They don't have the enzymes to do that. And anyway, they don't require any energy because it's the host cell that is copying them. It's the host cell that requires the energy. Excrete. They don't produce any wastes. No chemical reactions take place in the virus. They don't produce any waste, so they don't excrete. And we've sort of mentioned this, but they don't require any nutrition or any nutrients because no chemical reactions take place and they don't require any energy. So they're non-living, they're particles, they're inert. So the final thing that we were going to mention was antibiotics, and why your doctor always tells you, don't take antibiotics for a viral infection. There is a very, very good reason for this. Taking antibiotics when you don't need to increases antibiotic resistance, which is becoming a big problem. We may be faced with a future where we have very few or no antibiotics to treat bacterial infections. Antibiotics don't work against viruses for an important reason. So antibiotics are chemicals that affect a number of different things, three main things. So one is DNA replication. So they affect DNA replication. They stop it in bacterial cells. They stop, for example, some of the enzymes from working that copy DNA in bacterial cells. Viruses don't have those enzymes to copy their DNA. So you could throw as much antibiotic at the virus. It's not going to do anything because A, it's not a bacteria, and B, it doesn't have bacterial enzymes. So nothing's going to happen. It's an inert particle. One of the other things that antibiotics do is they stop protein synthesis. Again, they target bacterial enzymes involved in protein synthesis. So bacteria can't produce proteins and they die. Viruses don't make their own proteins. The host cell does. So there's nothing to target. So they're useless against viruses. Also, one of the other things that antibiotics can do is stop the production of a cell wall in bacteria. Bacteria have cell walls, and again, enzymes that produce that cell wall or the cell wall itself can be damaged by antibiotics, so that without a cell wall, the bacterial cell can't survive. Again, virus particles, no cell wall, no enzymes involved in the cell wall synthesis, etc., etc. So the antibiotic is useless. So there is a very good reason why you don't take antibiotics for virus infections. A, because they don't work, and B, because it causes antibiotic resistance in bacteria, which is going to be a big problem. So thank you very much for listening. I hope that helped. Don't forget to subscribe and like my channel, and take a look back for more videos soon. Thanks very much.